in the third lecture of the webinar series we are having on the gaming and simulation. So he will be speaking on why is change difficult and how can serious gaming help. Now, looking at the topic, it looks like more on a psychological problem, because change is always difficult for anybody in any field, since this is an inherent character in humans to look for safety and the experience. So when an experience accumulates, then people are bound to get into a routine rather than change a routine. And this gaming facilitates, since it is serious gaming, meant for application, designed for a particular purpose, whether it is for industry or business or health or any other education. So this change, which a serious gaming can bring about, should always be looked after as a beneficial change. And our expert, Dr. Ivo, will enlighten us about this and how the serious gaming can make the change easier rather than difficult. So we hope by the end of this lecture, we will be well informed about how serious gaming can help the change. I invite Dr. Ivo once again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Before starting today's webinar, may I introduce our speaker. Dr. Ivo Benzler is Professor Emeritus of Serious Gaming at the NHL Standen University of Applied Sciences, where he was conducting innovative research into the design, implementation, and value contribution of serious gaming. Prior to the appointment at NHL Standen, he had a 23 years career as a senior principal at Accenture Strategy, and he held the position of the associate professor at the Delft University of Technology. Throughout his consulting and academic career, he has been focusing on development and implementation of change management, business modeling, workforce planning, and simulation and serious gaming approaches aimed at helping his clients deal with their transformation challenges. He often presents at international conferences and has published in the field of serious gaming, change management, and simulation-based modeling. I once again welcome Dr. Ivo Benzler in the webinar. Now I hand over the session to our resource person, Dr. Ivo Benzler. Over to you, sir.
So I assume I can start. Then let me see if I succeed in sharing my screen. So do you see my presentation?
Sir.
Okay.
Yes.
And you can hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. This is how sometimes I feel about change. Coming of a particular age, you struggle with things that change in your life and try to learn new things. Let me see how I have to do it this way. When I talk about change, mostly I talk about change in a institutional or organizational context. So the examples that I will be giving also come, so it's not about personal change, but it's more change of, when we talk about a group of people who organize themselves in a particular way in the business or institution. Very basically, when we are approaching a change or we see the need for change, the first step is try to envision the change. Where do we want to be? So where do we want to go to? how should we start? Then we need to enable the change. So how do we get there where we want to be in the future, and how do we ensure that we don't stop? And then last but not least is how to make sure that it works, so that actually we don't fall back again to the valley of despair. And this implies a change journey, and very often this is not a journey that ends. It is a journey that continues all the time, but I'll come back to that point later. Then let me introduce something that might be unfamiliar, but this helps us at the University of Applied Sciences in NHLS, but also me personally. When I think about gaming, serious gaming, try to understand what is that. We perceive on the right side, we perceive something as reality. And each of us perceive that reality in different ways. That's why we call it perceived reality. So we have an experience in reality. There is effect of what we do. We reflect on that. We get some insights or learn. We relate that to the models of reality that we have in our head, the conceptual models, or the language is a model, the understanding of how the world works, or how do we function in the world. And then we translate that into action. And this is how we operate subconsciously and consciously all our lives. We experience something, we gain insights, something happens in trying to relate those insights to our understanding of reality. And when we design an intervention action, we act, implement, and then we hope to feel the effects. But very often it is either impossible or it would be extremely costly to do all the time, everything in real time. So we develop what we call simulated reality. Sometimes the simulated reality is just some kind of a what if kind of thinking, or a simulation or discussion, or games, serious games, where we, based on the models of reality that we have, we create an intervention. By play, we have some experience, we reflect on that experience, we learn from that, and then see how can we transfer those insights, first by relating them to reality, and then translating into action. And that creates an opportunity for us to sort of play with the possible futures in a safe environment. But this is also how we think. This is how our brain works, because our brain is continuously running a number of simulations of possible futures without us being aware of it, because otherwise we would be always too late in action. It's something that is also in the literature called predictive coding. So our brains are continuously simulating the possible future, so the possible reality, before we act. And this view or this approach is sort of in a fundamental to our approach to serious gaming. Going back to change, whether we talk about organizational, institutional, or social change, the change is not easy. And there are a number of challenges or reasons why the change is needed. Some of them are more related to the structural components, some systemic, individual, or behavioral. These insights come from my experience and my research that I've done for the last more years than I want to remember sometimes. And this is one way to look at serious gaming, not to look at it as an instrument in itself, but to look at it as an instrument that has a purpose in actually helping organizations go through change, which per definition is not easy. So I'll go through each of those 9 components. So the first challenge is that when we look in organizations, is that different parts of organization change or can change at different speeds. If, for instance, we can change strategy of an institutional organization every 5 minutes if we want to. But changing the processes or changing the organizational structures or changing the competencies, the skills of people takes longer. Implementing new systems, new technologies. And when we talk about changing the culture, that is then the slowest. So each of these layers of an organization change at a different speed. And it is important to recognize the speed limit at which these different elements can change. And instead of treating change as sort of columns, we'll have a team working on the processes, we'll have a team working on the systems, we'll have a team working on production processes, or team working on a human component. Actually, to be successful, the change should be managed by managing the slippage between the different components to prevent that the slow ones are blocking the quick ones and the quick ones are slowing the fast ones. An example of a serious game I developed for the global energy company is to help them getting insight into challenges, but also benefits of changing the organization from a function-centric to a customer-centric one. And by creating a metaphor of the organization, you see some paper boxes and the people. It was about the global recruiting process. The people get an insight in how would the change impact organization and which part of the organization. And through that, by playing the future in a much simplified way, but focusing on the core components of the change, to sort of help increase their engagement and reduce resistance to change, because they were helped through a serious game to understand how these different components of the organization can change or change at different speed, and how can they look at it in a more synergetic way. The second challenge is that what in engineering, at least I was educated as an architect many years ago. The terminology of EGAP or NEGAP is that we mostly plan for everything going according to the plan. But nothing ever goes according to the plan is usually the norm in a large organizations and large change processes. And that requires from us, if we want the change to be successful, that we redefine the rules of the game so that we do not deliberately overestimate the benefits and underestimate the costs in order to increase the likelihood that somebody will provide us with approval and funding of doing things. And I don't know, in India, I was in India, I think 3 times, but if I look at the Netherlands, even in the Netherlands, I have not seen any large infrastructural project or intervention in our country that was on time and on budget. And why is that? Because to get approval, people were overestimating the benefits and underestimated the costs. And then they say, well, if we start, then we will see how it goes. And another component is that especially we cannot predict the future. And because we cannot predict the future, we should think in terms of the scenarios, but also think in terms of how can we plan for uncertainty so that we are prepared if things turn out differently than we have anticipated. So that the whole planning for the change should be focusing on trying to get the as best possible insight into what would are the benefits and the costs, but also to avoid what I call the delusional optimism and plan for the uncertainty. So be always ready for the things that might happen. An example of the serious game which was used to discuss this is a business resilience game I developed for a number of energy companies, where we're looking into exploring the organizational aspects that contribute to resilience and longevity. And resilience and longevity of an organization requires flexibility, requires this planning for uncertainty. And the game was about looking into your organization and under different scenarios, looking into which organizational aspects are going to contribute more or less to our resilience as an organization. And then as an outcome position, the organization along the key drivers of resilience and develop a plan of action. So the game helped reinforce the insight that we need to plan differently and that we need to plan for a certainty and a flexibility, and then help them come up with the plan of action for the different companies involved. The challenge number 3 is that change by definition implies, certainly in a larger organizations, institutions, many diverse and conflicting interests. And the challenge is, how do we, knowing that there are these different conflicting interests, how do we, can we, and then how can we create a win-win situation for all? And of course, that is an ideal that is never reached, but it is important to be able to align the expectations of different stakeholders to minimize the conflict of interest. And to do that, hopefully to minimize the value of despair that sometimes employees, sometimes management go through, by actually productively engaging all stakeholders to reduce their resistance and motivate them for action. And one example of a game is to go to zero game. It's about reducing the CO2 emissions for cities. It was an European project, and in this game, the different stakeholders from the cities, so the municipal government, the energy companies, the distribution companies, the network companies, the housing corporations, the owners of properties, technology companies, are trying collectively to help an imaginary city reduce the CO2 emissions by introducing a number of measures. But to do that effectively, they need to first understand how complex the energy transition is and what are the dependency between stakeholders and what are the impacts of measures, but also what can they do collectively and what they can do individually to actually collectively help the city to reduce the emissions. And the outcome of this game, we have played in a number of countries in Europe, is to increase understanding of the stakeholders in their interests, constraints, and options they have, with the hope that they would then implement that in their, what I call, real life. And the game lasts about a day with Russian and debriefing. And although it is relatively simple, it provides enormous depth of insights for participants then to take with them into the reality, and hopefully through the understanding they have built, minimize this value of despair, but also understand each other and try to look at the system as something that requires a more cooperative than competitive approach. Challenge number 4 is that change requires what they call symbiotic and not predatory relationships. And if we look at how the nature works, the most successful organisms in nature are symbiotic relationships. Even ourselves, we are symbiotic relationship between us and I don't know how many billions of bacteria that lives on us and in us. And without the bacteria, we would not exist, and without us, the bacteria would not exist. So, and that is multiplied in many different ecosystems. That the success in nature is delivered through networking and not combat. And then if you look at organization, my belief is that the success in an organizational context, and certainly when we talk about large organizational changes, is that we need to create and maintain both internal, external networks and alliances to be able to change successfully, and to manage the change through co-evolution, so that we are encouraging self-organizing emergent behaviors, that we are sort of engaging all our different stakeholders in actually moving together. Because if you're an organization and you think you can do it without your suppliers and your clients, you will not exist long. But the same way, the suppliers and the clients requires you to provide them with the products or services that you do. So it is in a sort of interdependent system, and that requires the continuous one-way competition, because you want to get better then, but also cooperation, mutual adaptation, and what they call sort of the co-evolution of organization and in the ecosystem where the organization operates. And an example of the serious game, it's a country management game. It's a game where, and I've implemented it all over the world in different organizational contexts, is that usually for management, they have to run a country in a sort of developing country. And by not playing their organization, but by playing in a sort of metaphor for an organization, in this case, the country, to get insight into the importance of leadership, communication, cooperation within a complex network organization, because there is a national level, regional level, local level. So there are all the different levels and interdependencies that they have to discover and manage to actually successfully manage the country. And one of the examples, I've done this for a large manufacturer of ship engines, I think the world leader. It was part of the leadership training. On the first day of the week, they go through the training, and then on the last day of the week, they can play it again. And to see how actually much they have learned in actually managing and their leadership in managing an organization for a successful change. Because the game provides them with the insight in behaviors that are required to sort of leverage vertical horizontal alignment to improve the performance, or to create an aha effect for them, to then implement it or translate it into action in reality. So that the game is sort of a concentrated experience of how the success can only happen if sounds very simple, if we work together, if we are actually trying to understand how interdependent we are from each other, and that we need to approach it in a different way. And because very often the organizations there is even competition within an organization, although they depend on each other, these different functions and different, what I call silos in the organization. Challenge number 5 is that change is not an event, but it is a continuously evolving process. So we cannot say we are not going to change because we are changing whether we like it or not. We are changing physically, our body is changing, but the environment around us is continuously changing. So to look at the change as a project, so there is a beginning and there is the end, and then everybody will be happy ever after, like in the fairy tales, that doesn't work that way. And that insight that we should look at change as something that is continuous and learning as something that is continuous. There are 2 main components to it, is that there is always a natural resistance to change, even at the moment where it looks illogical that we need to change, because the most successful organizations are not changing when the things go wrong. They are changing when the things go right. So they are changing when they are most successful, which sounds illogical, but that is the way to look at change, is to be proactive and continuously not pretending that everything stands still and that everything will look like it is for the future, is to continuously move. And that brings me to the other one, which is also sort of insight from the nature. Any system in nature which reaches equilibrium dies. Because there is, and that goes to the fundament of how we are also built, to the level of the electrons and if the electrons stop moving, then there is death. So that instead of focusing in organization on size and stability, should use the time and effort and energy to actually focus on adaptability and a speed. Because the change environment will at some point force us to change, but at the moment that we are forced to change, very often it is too late, because we are not ready to go through that step. So the challenge in a large organization is how to prevent death from equilibrium. And many organizations do that, successful organizations, by having a very stable core, but allowing for chaos on the edges, to sort of continuously get new insights, new input, and also allow for some things to go out of the organization, come into the organization. And then that eventually helping the core to develop and move further. An example of a game is a change journey game. And it is a very funny and entertaining, but also very deep as a metaphor. I've developed this game for the large global chemical company, where it was initially run, and then I used it later for different companies, but it was initially run for the directors of all production plants worldwide, because they had to become change managers, because they are in charge of organization and they should become the change managers in that organization. It's a game that lasted 2 days, but it's a very strange to think that they not only accepted to play it, but also they enjoyed playing it for 2 days, because what they had to do is that the context of the game is that I, as a facilitator, I'm actually a 2-year-old child. And I have put them in a position of different consulting companies, different teams, and they have to help me save my kindergarten. And the case that I give is very complex if they read through it very well, because it's a very funny story and a very funny context, but it's about kindergarten where the organization needs to change, the systems needs to change, the way how it is being financed, the skills, competencies of so all of the components of the change are sort of hidden in a case, and they have to discover it, and then they have to engage different stakeholders, me as a client, but also the colleague facilitators, the colleagues from Accenture. They were playing my friend or my mother or the director of the kindergarten. So they had to engage with different sets of stakeholders. Each of them have a different perspective on a problem. And they have to then translate that into a sort of an understanding what and how should the change journey look like, but also then to be able to present it in a compelling way. But to force them to really think out of the box and think creatively is that me as a client, I'm saying, I'm a 2-year-old child, I cannot read. So whatever you come up with should have as little words as possible. And I have a limited attention, so you have about 5 minutes at the end to sell the story. But you can engage with me if I'm not sleeping. So there's a whole funny story related to it. And it was amazing to see how, what you say, serious management, top level, very quickly start playing and engage, because they understand the context, because most of these people have children of the late, I would say, the age that go to the kindergarten. And so that was, let's say, the easy part. The difficult part was to actually see how complex the issue is and what kind of changes are required and how they propose it. But it's also how do you engage stakeholders and how do you sell your idea about what should happen and when and how to your stakeholders. Do you really understand your stakeholders? And I always talk about an anecdote which stayed for me and will stay for me for the whole life, probably, is that one of the teams, I did not see them doing anything, and they were supposed to put some posters and cut and glue and paint and things, and I didn't see them do anything. And a colleague, but I didn't want to intervene because I was a part of the game. I'm a child. I'm a client. And at the end of the end of the second day, when they had to present, they took 2 flip charts and hanged a shawl between them. Out of nowhere came with the gloves made of paper with characters on them, and they presented their story as a puppet theater. And I was amazed because they said not only that the story was good, but also the way of how they choose the context in which they were. So they are talking to a child. How do you tell to a child? You tell a story and you use the puppet theater. And the content was great. So, and that's what the game provides, is this freedom to go out of the standard way of thinking, to put people in a metaphor, and to engage them in an entertaining, and because they were all laughing for 2 days long and enjoying the whole thing, but also at the same time extremely serious. And then, because the objective was to engage, how to engage with the client, to understand the need, effective change plan, present it. But at the end of this today, they came with actionable insights, and actually in a debriefing, they were already talking how they're going to apply those insights in the real life in their organization. The challenge number 6 is that if you talk to different people in an organization, large organization, everybody has an idea of how the to ensure that a change happens. And also in literature, scientific literature, there are many different theories on change. And usually I sort of divide them in three categories. One is the carrot and the stick theory. If you reward or punish, the change will happen. So you reward good behavior, you punish bad behavior, and that will motivate people to change. Believe me, it doesn't work. But there are still theories that say that that's the way to go about. I haven't seen it working in any organization I was working with. The second set of theories is what I maybe derogatory call the tree hugging theory. Is like, let's go everybody and together and understand each other work. So try to sort of the total opposite to the carrot and the stick create, and then hoping that will create the change. The last couple of years, there are new theories coming online, so to say, and that is using the understanding of how our brain works. And so the two components is what we call shaping reality through expectations. If you cultivate the moments of insights, if you sort of help people understand the expectations, through that you are going to shape reality through those expectations, because you will initiate a change, a large-scale change in the mental maps of the people. And then the second component is what we call attention density, is that you need to create a sustained, repeated, purposeful, focused attention that is required to hardwire insights and have the change in our brains, because we have a limited working memory. And an example from it is that if you have a large organization change and then you prepare everything and then you say, yeah, but go live is 3 months later or 6 months later, so you just helped everybody be on board, and then the tension is gone because they have to go back to the old way of working before everything is ready to go to the new way of working. So it won't help. Example of the game I use to highlight this is for the large global chemical company. They need to train, and it was one of the rare that the game was developed for only 20 people, which was sort of, why would they invest? But these are the supplier managers, extremely important component of the helping the organization be efficient and effective. And they developed a new process or a system for the supplier managers to engage with their suppliers to create sort of the value proposal for both. And it is a 6 weeks process, and we concentrated that 6 weeks process in a 2-day game, where the supply managers went through this 6 weeks process to learn how the process goes and the steps that are required to develop a business case for innovation in the relationship between the organization and the suppliers. And what they created is in these 2 days, they started to build the knowledge and the skills and behaviors that are required for effective supplier management process. But even more than that is that during playing the game, within the game context, they have come up with an innovation idea, which they implemented in reality later, I heard. So sort of the game provided and a sort of concentrated, what they call the attention density process, and also about the expectations about what would that mean in the future, that they actually use the game to create a real life innovation. And in that case was related to actually, because the chemical companies, they need steel barrels. And they were then getting those barrels from different suppliers in different countries, transport, supply chain issues there. And the idea they come up with is to say, why don't we allow one of the suppliers to build their facility inside our facility? You shorten the supply chain line, you have to immediate contact, incredible improvement. Still, it's a separate company, just that it is inside their site and help them actually reduce the costs of the whole process, but also the client satisfaction, because they could deliver quicker and they could deliver the right things just by playing a game. And that's why I say a game is not just a game. A game can have enormous impact in reality if applied in the right way. The challenge number 7 is that, and that's what was sort of mentioned in the introduction in the beginning of this seminar about the psychological component, is that change does create psychological but also physiological discomfort. And we need to really understand that if we want to manage the change in a right way. So we need to understand and manage the limits to change. If you would ask me to learn one of the languages of India or Chinese or something that I currently don't speak, and you say, Ivo, you have a week, that would create an enormous psychological stress. But also, because I have to learn something completely new, I would need to use a frontal part of my brain, which uses more sugar, more things from my body and needs to get in and create. And when people say they are tired because the brain is using enormous amount of energy for something that they are not accustomed to, or something they need to learn new. So everything that we need to learn new, which we do not know, actually requires more energy. And the more that we learn, then this whole neural networks connections are shifting to the back of our head. And that's why we can do things. We don't have to learn everything every day. So we can, so we need to find a way to sort of change and hardwire new habits with speed. So how do we ensure that there is a speed of transferring this work from our prefrontal cortex to basal ganglia, which in the back of our head, because that has a larger storage capacity. So how do you reduce the psychological and physiological discomfort of the people who are involved in a change to do that? An example of the game is a Leadership Factory. It's a game developed for the Dutch Air Force. It's a part of the last part of the couple of weeks leadership training. And the day before the last day, it's a day-long game. They have to come. It's for 12 people at a time. They can come together, and they have to build an airplane, cargo airplane. You see it on a picture. It's a huge thing, from 4,000 pieces of Lego blocks. But the clue is that they are separated, these 12 people, in 4 teams. So there is a team that needs to build the left side of the airplane, team that has to build the right side of the airplane. There is a management team, and there is a logistics and a planning team. But the left-hand side production, they cannot see each other and they cannot communicate directly, which is sort of simulating that you, in some military operations, you have, certainly we talk about now, you have the people on the field, you have people in the headquarters, you have people, the NATO and Brussels. So this disconnected, so they have to communicate via the logistics and via the management. And at the end of the day, the expectation is that these two pieces will fit together perfectly to create a single airplane with a huge number of constraints, because what is the size of the wing, number of engines, the ROM, so everything was related to how let's say, the real cargo planes would be built. And the metaphor was chosen because it is sort of close to them. Of course, they are not the airplane builders, but they could understand the context of the game. And through this day, they were sort of building and testing their competencies, which are required to balance the result focus, client focus, organizational focus, and at the end, there was an assessment, self-assessment of them, and they used that to create an actionable personal development plan. So they first were 4 weeks in a bush training. They came to the office, the whole office in the barracks. They played this airplane game, and then the last day they had to sort of, what did we learn? What did not work in the sort of leadership factory experience, and use that to develop their personal development plan. Because what the game provided them is a very concentrated experience of what they can and what they still cannot do effectively or efficiently as a team, but also as an individual, and being open about it. And they say, okay, I see that I need to work further on ABC. The challenge number 8 is when we talk about learning, because if you want to change, you need to learn. And the same as change, we cannot not learn. We learn all the time, most of the time subconsciously or instinctively. But there is a paradox, because why do we learn? Because we learn in order not to learn. So why did I learn to write? So I don't have to learn to write every day. Why did I learn to walk, to talk, to... So we try as a human being as quickly as possible to create habits, so we don't have to create those habits again. But in times of change, we need to change habits. So we need to sort of have the learning. How do we learn to change habits? But also, most importantly, how do we learn to change the ways in which we change habits? Because the learning is the most sustainable competitive advantage. And also, I mean, a lot of presentations, I refer back to the experience I had when I was born in Croatia, it was Yugoslavia then. I moved to the graduate study in the United States. I first did a master, and then I started my PhD. And the first day of my PhD, sort of the start, I came to talk to my supervisor, promoter, and he said, "Ivo, great that you want to do this," because we knew each other from before. But let me make one thing very clear. I'm not going to teach you anything. And I was like, sorry, I just paid $36,000 for the first semester. And you're telling me that you're not going to. And he said, I'm not going to teach you anything. The only thing I'm going to do, I'm going to help you to learn how to learn. And for me, coming from a sort of mid-European tradition of learning, it was an absolute shock. Although I already spent a couple of years doing master, but it was also still in this, the smart teacher telling the students, and then I had to replicate. But the PhD was totally different story. And then I realized that actually the only important thing is not the habits or it's the ability to learn. And then the ability to learn faster and better than somebody else. And a game that I proposed. It's a team up, and it's a computer game where people experience the importance of clear communication and sharing the insights when they are actually in a very they require the collaboration. They depend on each other, and they at different times different information, and that help them increase the awareness of actually the importance of teamwork, leadership, and communication competencies to actually learn quicker and learn better. And then the last but not least, and certainly looking at the time, is that the challenge is that we see communication as a main vehicle for change. If you look at any organization, how they implement change, newsletters, management, creating a video, it's all about verbal and written communication. But the communication is unreliable. There is a research done on the real effect of all written and verbal communication, and it fails 88% of the time. So we are using something that is successful 12% of time as the main vehicle for change. And that is what needs to change. So we need to go beyond the language. So we need to ensure that communication is understandable, relevant, timely, measured, and actionable, but without relying only on the language. And so say, games are one component of that, simulations. So there are many different interventions, but also very important communicating by walking the talk, because if you want to inspire in your organization people to change, don't just tell them, do it. Change the structures, change the processes, do yourself things that you expect from the others. Because I've done many organizational change processes, and then you have the management say, well, they need to change because the process this, and I say, no, you need to change, and if you change, then they will change as well. And they say, what do you mean? Yeah, because if you are saying that only the change is required sort of down the scale in the organization, that will not work, because then you are not doing the things that you are preaching to the others to be done. So you have to start with yourself. An example of a game that we use it quite frequently still also at university is a game where people have to replicate an object from wooden blocks. But the people that hold the object and people that have to replicate the object, they cannot talk directly. They can talk to each other, but they cannot see what they have. And with a very limited way of communicating, to highlight actually what are the requirements for clear communication and how to translate that into action. Because we believe that if we say something, that per definition, it should be understood. But that's not how it works. Because the language is a model of reality, but each of us has different models which are then matched or not matched perfectly with that model of reality of a language. If I would say a word, love, yeah, I think whoever would be asked would have a different definition what it means. Or if I would say a word, say, for instance, the language of this game is if you say you have to put the blue block on a side, but if you have not defined that each block has 3 sides, and you have to be specific which side do you want to go with. And so there's a huge misunderstanding that the language in itself is enough. That's why we use body language. That's why we use drawings. That's why we use the visuals. We use so we use many different, and the gaming is one of those things. So that's it from me. And I know it was fast, and I know it was a lot, but you will get the presentation. And I actually hate these things where I cannot see people while I speak, because if I have you on a screen, then I don't see my presentation. I don't have two screens. So I had no idea whether you were sleeping or listening or smiling or whatever. And so if there are any questions, I would be more than happy to ask. And if not, I always say I'm only an email away. You can email me your question and I will try to respond as quickly as possible.
Thank you, sir. I request all participants to please write your questions in the question and answer tab, or you can ask directly.
Yeah, I just had one question. Professor Leo, like you were talking about the global problems like climate change. Now, when the countries get together, then there is always a clash between the national interest and the global problem. Because if each one carries their national interest to the table, this is what always happens. And then how do you look at this problem? Because the problem is global. Problem is not national.
Well, it's I'll put it this way. It sounds very. And I think one of the quotes that I use in a change: if you don't like change, you will like irrelevance even less. It means at some point, people will, organizations, nations will have to change. Otherwise, they will stop to exist. It's only the question of when is this critical moment that they will realize that they need to actually go beyond selfish, the interests of their own people. And to understand that you cannot get something for nothing. I mean, there's always an expectation that we can get something for nothing, but that's not how it works. But we still try it. We still try to get our point of view, to get without actually giving anything in return. And if these things would have been simple, they would have been solved a long time ago. But that goes into the question of economy and politics, and so sometimes survival, and sometimes so there's in solving these issues in an organization is the many times easier, although it is very complex, than when we talk about the global issues where the nations and the global organizations have to work together. But there is no option. Yeah, we can try to ignore it, but then some countries might survive, but some countries will disappear.
Yeah.
And what I always preach is that if you can do something for help people understand each other better, understand the reasons behind and the consequences and the options, and the games can provide that. So games can provide a safe environment for people to explore and to experiment and to actually try to even highlight things more extremely than in reality to get things across.
Okay, thank you, sir. One more question is in the chat box.
Yes, I think Dr. League will ask.
Ma'am, would you like to ask?
About Ashley Brand. Now, Ashley Brand is one of my favorite. If you go Google and for the quotes, Ashley, brilliant. Very often, if you use only the language, then you can say something and people don't understand and they understand you. So you can say what we have what have we common is that we don't understand each other. But do we have something else in common? But to go beyond that, the only thing we have in common is that we don't understand each other, is how can we then create that understanding? And then the games and simulations can help us because we move beyond the language, because we put people in an experience where they experience themselves something which maybe by just communicating is not obvious, because people feel it in their, sometimes even physically in their body, the mind, and this experience then helps them actually understand each other better. And it is maybe I'm preaching to the converted in a way, but what I realize more and more is that the gaming and games is not something unique. This is how our brain works. Our brain is continuously playing. Our brain is continuously simulating and continuously predicting an enormous amount of possible futures. And when that future happens, the sort of the things come in, the light, the sound, and whatever, there is a match, and then we act. And if there is no match, we are surprised, and then we have to reform. Our brain reforms the expectations, and then we act. And that is because we, and then go into almost philosophical discussion, is that when you want people to understand each other, you expect them to share the same mental model of reality, but the reality doesn't exist. Because if I would ask you, tell me what is now, every nano part of the nano part of the nano part of a nanosecond in our life, there is only past and a future. So, and if we take that understanding, that means that the reality is not there. It is what our brain created, is how to link this past experience with the simulation of the future experience. And that's how we move through life. And that is different for everybody. And if you want to help people understand each other better, then you have to put them in an experiences together. And we can do it in real life, real time. But once I told, just to highlight the point, a large energy company said, well, we need to sort of have people behave safely when they are on these platforms in the North Sea and this. We want them to learn how bad is the unsafe behavior. And I say, it's very easy. Just let them do it. They will fall. They learned, but they will die. Now, but you want them to learn, you can teach them by dying or getting injured, but also you can create a simulated experience to help them learn actually the effect of their behavior. And it is much safer, it is much quicker. It is not one-to-one to reality, but it will create mental or reshape mental models of the people. So when they actually act in reality, that will become part of their memory. So the serious gaming creates the future memories, so the memories of the future, what I called, for people, because you have experienced it already. So it's sort of coded in your brain.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful session on serious gaming. I now welcome Dr. Jigyasu Dubey, Coordinator of Center of Excellence in Simulation and Gaming, SBBB, for the words of thanks.
Thank you, Pali ma'am. At the outset, our most sincere thanks to Dr. Ivo Weisler, Professor Emeritus of Serious Gaming at NHL Stenden University of Applied Sciences, the Netherlands, for accepting our invitation and for sparing his precious time out of his busy schedule. In his talk, Dr. Ivo covered the main challenges for successful change with examples of different serious games which successfully address these challenges. Thanks, Dr. Ivo, for such a knowledgeful, enriching session. Thank you very much. We are also thankful to the ISAGA for the collaboration and support in organizing this Pratiti-2023 webinar series. We express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Upinder Dar, Honorable Vice Chancellor, and Dr. Santosh Dar, Director of the University, for their guidance and motivation. Thanks to Dr. K. N. Guruprasad, Dean, Faculty of Science, for being with us today. Our sincere thanks to the today's panelists, Dr. Elizabeth, Dr. Kanige, Mr. Leo, Dr. Uttam Sharma, Dr. T.K. Mandal, Dr. Anand Rajawat, Dr. Vinod Dar, and sorry if I forget to take the name of any panelist, and all the participants who make this webinar successful. I am also thankful to Professor Rupali Bhartiya and all the members of the COESG of the university and IT team for their kind support and help. The next webinar of the series is scheduled on 24th April 2023, which is fourth one, and same time. And resource person will be Miss Himani Chandorkar. She is co-founder of Actium 360 and ET 360. Hope to see you again on next webinar. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you. I request all participants to please fill the feedback form as mentioned in the chat box, and we will be back with another interesting and knowledgeable session on gaming and simulation. Till then, have a nice time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you. Bye-bye, Dr. Ivo. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for joining.
Bye-bye.